What's up, guys? So, today I wanted to take some time to talk about the possible future, right? When it comes to NASCAR games. And, as I've told you guys, there's really only two realistic scenarios. And one of them is, like I said, slim and none, which is Motorsport Games actually releasing a game this year. Um, if they release something, which again, I would be shocked if they actually got to the point where they released something, it's not gonna be good. And I don't see how they're actually able to come out with something, right? They just announced back in October that they started working on the game, even though earlier last year, back in spring, they announced that they had already started development of that 2023 NASCAR title. So they've already contradicted themselves. Okay, so that for me is a huge red flag. All that time, I thought they were already supposedly working on something. Then came uh, more or less September, October of at the end of the year, and they announced that uh, they were starting development of the next game. So that's where I was like, what the fuck? Didn't you guys say like back in spring that you started? So I'm not going to stay on that too long. That's a big contradiction, but let's just take them at their word. They started developing in October. Well, as you guys just saw, if you were watching my last video, um, they're not paying their employees. Okay, they haven't paid them since October. So who's working on this game? There's 30 employees that were listed that haven't been paid. So the chances of actually ending up with a game coming out in 2023 is very slim. I never want to say 100% about anything because you just never know. I thought Motorsport Games would have died by now. I honestly thought there's no way they could still be hanging on for life, and they are. They for it's like they refuse to die. They're always finding a new way to just hang on. So I'm not gonna be making 100% predictions on hey they're who knows, right? But realistically, the chances are slim and none, right? 5%, right? So let's move away from motorsport games, right? The only other realistic scenario is for iRacing to take over, okay? EA Sports is they haven't shown any interest in NASCAR, and I'm glad they haven't. Uh, I think people have forgotten how bad EA Sports is, or EA as a company. When they think of EA, a lot of people are still thinking 20 years ago. That's a generation ago. Most of those people do not work at EA anymore, and those who do have moved up. Um, EA is just a completely different entity at this point. So people really have to come to accept that. This is not the EA of 20 years ago. EA is one of the worst gaming companies in existence. They're greedy. All they care about are microtransactions. You don't want EA anywhere near a NASCAR license. But the good news is, I don't think they want it. I don't think they see a profit in it. They haven't shown an interest. So I don't think we have anything to worry about. The only company that has openly shown interest is iRacing. They now own Monster Games, which is under their umbrella as developers, as well as Orontes Games, which I talked about early last year. Don't really know anything about these guys, but they are part of iRacing. So whatever they're doing behind the scenes, I don't know much about them, but they are all working together. So I'm going to focus at this point on iRacing and what is the possible future. Okay. Um, in my opinion, they are the only. people that I have some excitement about. There's no guarantees, right? Because we don't really know what iRacing would produce in terms of the video game side of things, right? They are a provider of online simulation racing. That side of their business is apples and oranges, different from developing video games for the market. So, we do have something we can look at. And let me hold on a second. Let me, where am I? Okay. I want to look at this article real quick. So, we're going to talk a little bit about World of Outlaws. I haven't played World of Outlaws. Briefly thought about picking it up, but there are several reasons why I just decided not to. First and foremost, and most importantly, I don't like dirt racing. I don't care about World of Outlaws. The whole thing is just not my cup of tea. It's just, I'm not into it. So for me to go out and buy that game, and I know I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, it's not for me. So I didn't see a reason to do it other than curiosity. That just wasn't enough. Okay. Um, the other reasons are simple, like it's not on PC. Yes, I can get it for my PlayStation 5, but the whole thing is I don't want to play on a hand controller. So that really is a big deal to me. I I can't go back to using a hand controller like I used to, back in the old days. To me, it just takes something away. Um, and I could technically hook up my PS5 to my Fanatec system, but it's just too much. Like if it was a NASCAR game, I would do it. I'm not doing it for World of Outlaws. So those are my reasons. Take it or leave it. But I've checked out a lot of gameplay videos. I've seen What If Racing play. I've seen other people play. I've read articles on it. It's not the same thing as playing. So I want people to understand that. That's why I didn't review it. I'm not going to review something that obviously I don't have personal experience with. Also, um, it just wouldn't be right for me to speak loosely on something that, like I said, if I'm not that into it, what's the point? However, judging from what other people have said, people speak very highly of it. The gameplay videos do look pretty solid. Okay. I'm going to give you my personal thoughts just on what I've seen. Um, it is like a polished product, but I will say it does kind of look and feel, and I shouldn't say feel because I haven't played it, but just watching other people play, I get that feeling like it just feels like a NASCAR Heat product. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the point is, it is a very highly rated game by the people that do play it. I really haven't heard anything negative about it, so that's what I'm going by. Okay, so I want to take a look at this article. This is an old article, but it's not one that I've seen. But for me to talk about iRacing and the future of a NASCAR game with them, I want to get into this a little bit. So this is an old article. It says iRacing enters the console market with World of Outlaws game. I'm not going to read the whole article, but there is something here I just want you guys to see. When iRacing announced its acquisition of Monster Games at the beginning of 2022, it touted the prospects of furthering its reach in the sim racing and gaming spaces. 8 months after the partnership was unveiled, the first product has now hit the market, marking a significant milestone for the company behind one of the premier racing simulators. For Monster Games, World of Outlaws, Dirt Racing is another release in its history of product producing console-based racing games. But for iRacing, it's the brand's foray into the console market. So, Monster Games started development of this game by themselves, they were going to be the publisher as well as obviously the developer. So it was all going to be sort of their own thing. Um, but 8 months after they started developing this game, that's when iRacing purchased them and took over. So now Monster Games was continuing to work on the game, but under the iRacing umbrella. So the first 8 months were Monster Games by themselves. And let's read a little further. Monster Games had already been developing the product for 8 months when it was acquired by iRacing in December of last year. This left about half of the game's production to be completed under iRacing's umbrella, leading to what Steve Myers, iRacing's executive vice president, called a hybrid project. So, the first 8 months was just Monster Games, then they got purchased by iRacing, and as they said here, that was they were halfway through the production of the game. So that means it took another 8 months, but it was under iRacing. So the first 8 months of developing World of Outlaws was just Monster Games, and the last 8 months, which is the other half, under iRacing, Monster Games, and Orantes. Right? All these people were in this together. Okay, so stick with me first. Okay, Myers told Racer that while he is excited for this game to be released, he is just as enthusiastic about future prospects and titles that could be on the horizon once iRacing finds its footing in the console gaming market. Okay, let's see. This just talking about excited about possible future releases. Um, Myers mentioned that a NASCAR title is one that the company is exploring. So yes, all of this has to do with the licensing. We know that Motorsport Games still has the license, but we also know that iRacing uh, revealed, like I think in November, um, don't quote me on that. But they just put out a sort of a tease, right, to the public that how would they feel about, which was the 20th anniversary of Dirt to Daytona. So they put out a teaser talking about how would people feel if there was a new Dirt to Daytona. And of course, most people were excited, including myself, right? So to me, the that is the only realistic option at the moment, unless some other developer comes out of nowhere, some or an indie developer who decides we're interested in making a NASCAR game if and when we can either work something out with Motorsport Games or they just completely go bankrupt, right? Whatever the case is. I don't see that happening. I think, as has been proven already, right? We've seen Eutechnics. They pushed out 5 games. In my opinion, the whole thing was a failure, right? Um, I hated those games. There were small areas of those games that I thought were okay, but 5 years in, five game releases, and no real noticeable improvement, right? There were improvements, but you can't push out 5 games. Make the gaming community wait for 5 years as they're buying these games every year and getting what they were getting, to me, is unacceptable. I don't agree with this idea that you have to buy these games every year and you have to wait or more years to get a game that you're actually happy with. To me, that's unacceptable. It's the only industry where I see this as something that consumers accept. And I've told you guys 100 times before, and I'll keep telling you, that is insane. So I will never agree with that. I don't expect the first game to be perfect. Okay, I've never said that. But you have to deliver something more in terms of a fully fleshed out product. You can't keep doing this 5 year cycle. So we had Eutechnics, right? Then came Duesenberry Martin Racing, which changed their name to 704 Games. That was another 5 year cycle that to me ultimately was a failure. However, unlike Eutechnics, they did show much more improvement, right? So I will give 704 credit, um, but you know, I have to be honest, and I can't just say, hey, give them too much credit for certain things that honestly should have been there from the beginning, right? Stats. It took 4 years to get stats. Um, the AI finally was really solid by the fourth game. In my opinion, NASCAR Heat 4 is the best game we've had in well over a decade, right? Because people forget that EA Sports, the last few games that they released were bad too. And a lot of people forget that. People have rose colored glasses when they look at EA. And EA started going downhill after 2006. Let's be honest, right? If the best game of all time was 2004 Thunder, 2005, you kind of equal but not, and then kind of a slight departure. Then 2006, then 2000, and as you saw, as time went on, the games got progressively worse. 2009 was horrible. The only reason people even speak highly of that game, it's strictly because of the online multiplayer. That's it. And you can't just say, well, the online was great and the rest of the game was absolute garbage, but that's okay. No, it's not okay. So EA got progressively worse. Eutechnics came, that was a shit show. Dusenberry Martin came, then turned into 704. The first game was atrocious. The second game was marginally better. The third game, it got better. I think they focused on the wrong things. Adding a dirt series did nothing to improve the game. They should have focused on the other areas of the game. People were asking, begging for more customization, a paint booth, and every year they would promise that they would look into it. They never released a paint booth. Okay, the customization got marginally better. Um, as I said, they didn't add stats to like the fourth game. And even the stats, even when they finally added stats, it never really played a vital role in the career mode. There's no presentation, and to me, a game that does proper presentation and stats and all that, they all have to kind of work with each other. When you look at MLB The Show, you look at NBA 2K, the things you do, okay, your statistical milestones play a role in the presentation. If you break a record or you surpass certain people on like an all-time list, whatever, if it's related to your stats, the game tells you about it through the presentation. Whether it's announcers saying, "Hey, he just broke the 3-point record for a season," which I did. Um, the game should let you know these things. In MLB The Show, when you break records, the game lets you know when you pass certain statistical milestones. And that's what I mean. It's not enough to just have some stats hidden in some fucking tab that you have to go look when you feel like it, but you never know about it unless you go look for it. The game where it's in your career mode should always be all together, working together properly, right? So, in my opinion, NASCAR Heat 4 is the best console game we've had. In, I mean, going all the way back to like the mid 2000s. So, that doesn't mean it's a great game, but it was solid. Now, to me, NASCAR Heat 5 was a slight dip, right? Somehow, I mean, I never thought it was possible, but they managed to release a game that was slightly worse than NASCAR Heat 4, and it was mostly cut and paste, rehash with updated rosters. So how do you fuck that up? But as we know now, Motorsport Games had already bought out 704, and they were involved in all that. So they just rushed out a cut and paste NASCAR E5, and it also brought along a lot of bugs and glitches. Now, I only played that game for a month before I gave up on it. And I started going to iRacing and I never looked back. So I don't know, and I'm assuming they somehow kind of patched it to the point where it's acceptable, right? So some of you may feel different. Like you might say, well, NASCAR Heat 5 is better than NASCAR Heat 4. So I'm not going to argue that. But for me, I gave up after the first month. And from my experience, NASCAR Heat 4 is the best of the past decade at least. And going all the way back to the mid 2000s, maybe. Um, yeah. So we know that these guys have been working. I mean, Monster Game started first 8 months, and then the second half, the other 8 months was under iRacing's umbrella, right? So we looked further down. They talked about how the game isn't going to be a simulator. It's going to be a console game. People have to understand that it has to work with a gamepad, um, things like that. See, they mentioned Orante's studio, which they acquired as well. And Monster, we can make a product that is absolutely geared towards the racing enthusiast, but much more accessible. Something that you could play with your kids. I don't like hearing this. Now, I get it. It's a video game, uh, but every that makes me. It's a reminder of Motorsport Games talking about 3-year-olds with hand controllers. This is a similar type of talk. I'm not saying there's something wrong with wanting your game to be accessible. That's not what I'm saying, but I don't let's not talk too much about kids. The vast majority of people that play these games are not these toddlers. Most of them are adults or teenagers, right? Older. Um, okay. So they talk about having to work with Sony and Microsoft, which is something that, of course, you have to do if you're developing for consoles. Um, Here's the thing. I'm hoping that if and when they start developing a Dirt to Daytona game or NASCAR, whatever it is, that they also develop a PC version because World of Outlaws does not have a PC version. Now, um, I think that's a problem. There's a huge market of people out there that would buy the game if it came out on PC. You can't just have only consoles. I don't know if they're worried about competing, with their own iRacing service. Maybe. I just don't see that. I'd like you really should have a PC version, and that's going to be extremely disappointing to me if they don't come out with a PC version. Okay? So, before I talk more about Dirt to Daytona, I want to continue to talk a little bit more about this World of Outlaws thing. So, let's go to hold on a second. Okay. Mm, no, I didn't switch, huh? Okay, hold on a second. I want to Okay, now you guys see that? All right. So, this was I want to show something else. Debut with a World of Out. Bear with me, guys. This is an old article, but what I want to point out is okay. This is something here that right here. Oh, come on. While iRacing console debut, while Monster Games is developing the new World of Outlaws game, okay, this is when they were still working on it. The title will use art assets from iRacing. So this is really where I want to start talking about Dirt to Daytona and what's going to happen. Now, a lot of people said, because from what I've seen in the past, based on past history, the first game, right, is the most important, and it's when you're building from scratch, ground up. Most of these games take somewhere around, I would say, 3 years, give or take a few months. It could be a little less, it could be a little more, but let's just round it off. 3 year development cycle from scratch, right? Once you have that first game, obviously these guys release a yearly updates and all that shit, and they call it a new game, but it's technically just updating and building off of the original build. So a lot of people have said to me, well, it wouldn't take that long to build a NASCAR game because look how quickly they pumped out a World of Outlaws game. So I'm not a game developer. I don't know the technical stuff. Some of you out there may either know more about actual technical aspects of game development, and maybe you can explain to me how they can come out or develop a game quicker, right, than the what we've seen. Because I may not be a technical expert on the actual game development, but I know that mostly it takes 2.5 to 3 years, because it's I that's what's happened in the past. So how can they pump out something quicker? And personally, I'm not sure they can. But when you look at World of Outlaws, it said 8 months, and then after iRacing purchased, it was another half, right? So that's 16 months that it took from start to finish to build World of Outlaws from the ground up, from scratch. So once iRacing took over, right? They were already 8 months in. As they said, Monster Games, the title will use, and I saw another article, I couldn't find it, I tried to look for it, but where they did confirm that iRacing was able to use art assets from iRacing. Okay? So, from what I can tell, what that means is they can literally take certain things, let's say a car model, right? And just plug it into the build of the game that they were working on, like for World of Outlaws, whatever the case is. Art assets could also mean, things like uh, other objects on the racetrack, or, whatever the case is. Anything that you visually see on the screen in terms of graphics or art style or whatever, they can use assets from iRacing. Now, this is where it gets confusing for me, because I know that when they built a World of Outlaws, that's built off of the Unity engine, and um, I don't know what the engine for iRacing is. I think that I heard somewhere at some point that it's based on something called the ISI engine, or that it's the same kind of engine that was used for NASCAR 2003, the season. I'm talking about the simulator, not the EA stuff. Okay. I'm talking about the racing sim that people still play to this day, modified and all that. So I'm not really 100% sure what's what. So feel free to correct me or explain to me, okay, this is built using this is built using that, this is, and I didn't think you could, but according to them, iRacing, using art assets right off of iRacing, were able to plug it into this build of World of Outlaws. I didn't know you could do that with, on this side you have the Unity engine, on this side you have what I'm assuming is something called the ISI engine. How is that possible? I didn't know if that was possible. If that is possible, that's good news, because you can cut development time drastically. If you can just take the assets right out of iRacing and use it in the build of a completely different game, that's exciting news to me. Now, how far can you go with it? I have questions. So I don't want people to think that I'm giving you definitive like uh opinions. Like I am kind of, I'm not sure. But to me, that explains why they were able to build this World of Outlaws game in 16 months. We're talking about just under a year and a half, right? It's really like a year and 4 months. But the reason that they were able to do this quicker, I think, is because from what they said, yeah, they could use iRacing assets. Okay. Then it says, thanks to the partnership, all vehicles will also benefit from an improved physics model. So, yes, we did hear that iRacing sort of tweaked the physics. Now, I'm not sure how they did it. If they just, helped Motorsport Monster Games as they were, coding the physics, or did they just pull something right out of iRacing and kind of detuned it for console and kind of played with it? I don't know, right? That stuff is over my head. I'm not a game developer, so the technical things like that, I can't tell you. But so suffice it to say, World of Outlaws was built in just less than a year and a half. That doesn't mean that you can do that with a NASCAR game, right? It might not be exactly the same thing. But if they could cut down some of that time, that could be good news as well. But they don't have the license. We don't know what's going on with Motorsport Games. So this is going to be quite a while before we even get to a point where, let's say, iRacing does get the license and they can officially break ground on a NASCAR game, right? We're a long way away from that. So even if they could develop a game, let's say 2 years, just for the sake of argument, that would be pretty quick. When does that 2 year development start? We don't have any idea. Monster Motorsport Games may drag this out all the way into the summer. I don't know. According to them, which they are full of shit, I don't believe a word they say, but there's no delays. Everything's on schedule, even though they're not paying the developers. We're only getting nothing but bad news. They haven't released any information on the next game. They haven't even given us a roadmap detailing how is this new game going to be different from 21 Ignition. These are things that I would be doing if I was Motorsport Games, because how else are you going to get people at least to get that negativity out of their heads and get some kind of excitement to generate, right? You don't have to be a fucking genius to know that they need help in that department. Why don't you release information? Well, the answer is simple. They don't have anything. They're bullshitting their way, around. They don't have anything to show you. The IndyCar game, they released like two screenshots like a year ago. They haven't even been able to show you anything new. So how are you going to generate any excitement? Your company is dying. You're on the verge of bankruptcy. Anything you can do just to generate some positive buzz and maybe even pump up the stock. You know, uh, good news and bad news affects stock prices. So if they had anything that could even get people just to feel like, hey, they are really are working on something, and it does look somewhat promising, right? Um, I'm not saying I would be fooled by it, but there's a lot of lemmings out there, and if you can generate any positivity, you can get Captain Sleeveless to be getting excited about it and pumping people up. That's good for Motorsport Games. Why don't you do that? Because there's nothing to show. So we don't know how long this thing is going to drag out and when someone else, namely iRacing, is going to break ground on a new game. So we are nowhere even near breaking ground on an iRacing game, right? But let's just say, forget that. Let's talk about what would this game, what's the possibilities? What could it look like? And what would I like to see? So, yeah, I just want the only thing in this article that I really wanted to show you is that yes, as you could see here, you, they said that for the World of Outlaws game, they did use assets from iRacing. So that to me is pretty amazing. So let me go to the other article. It's just to show you guys. Wait a minute. Yeah. Oh man, what happened to this? Oh, it's not popping up. All right, give me a second, guys. I'm screwing this up. So okay, let me get rid of that. Let me get rid of that. So bear with me. Hold on. Kind of properties. Okay, here we go. I hope you guys can see that. Yes, it looks like you can. Okay, so yeah, so that brings us to right Dirt to Daytona. Dirt to Daytona. I never really talked much about it, but it's not because it wasn't a great game. It was a great game. It's just that it kind of gets lost behind NASCAR 2004, right? Which most of us, including myself, consider that to be the best console NASCAR game ever made. But let's push that aside. You know, um, Dirt to Daytona is a 20-year-old game, and I remember that being such a great fucking game as well. I enjoyed the shit out of it. There's a lot to love about it. It wasn't perfect, but this was created by Monster Games. And to have iRacing come out and say, what would people think about, reviving this thing and doing another Dirt to Daytona, that excites me. And that gives me, like, if you were to ask me, what would you like these guys to do? I would say, yeah, you know what? Follow this. This was very well done. And yeah, this was back in 2002. So, yeah. And you could see, this is a 20-year-old game and it looks, it was a good game. Really cool stuff. You had to deal with funds, you had, I mean, management of teams, and this was great. Now, this here reminds me of iRacing a bit. When you race against the AI, there's no real presentation. This is it, right? You get like an article and it tells you, your name and where you finished and how you did. And this is okay, but this right here is it's a 20-year-old game. This is acceptable for a 20-year-old game. If they do another Dirt to Daytona, I don't want to see this. I want to see actual presentation. I want to see pre-race, post-race commentary. I want to see interviews. I want to see, you know, uh, news. Whether it's a news segment or something where they actually talk about you, how you did. This is acceptable 20 years ago. So yes, I want to see a new Dirt to Daytona, but obviously modernized, right? A modern version. Um, so I want to get back really quick to how iRacing was you actually able to plug in iRacing art assets. So when you look at iRacing is, I think, I wouldn't say horrible, but it's not a good looking game, right? And yes, if you have a good PC, a high-end PC, you can tune up the settings and you can make it look better. I have a 3080 Ti and it's maxed out and the car models look good. It's just when you start looking at everything else, it falls apart really fast. Doesn't matter how good your or how powerful a PC you have, the original art design is very outdated. Okay. Um, once besides the car models, the actual track, the track surface is acceptable, right? You do have laser scan tracks, but visually, yeah, okay, it's okay. But once you get off the actual gameplay surface and you start seeing all the other art assets around the iRacing, the fence, the crowd, any people you see off track, um, any the infield, if you see tire barriers, the wall, the safer barrier, all that stuff, the fence, it's all two-dimensional cardboard uh, um, pixels. It's a lot of it isn't even 3D textures. It's 2D texture art design. Now, iRacing's been around a long time. I guess that the original build is pretty outdated. So like they can there's a limit to what they can actually improve visually, right? And also the fact that it's an online service, this isn't a video game where you can store a ton of um, detail into a disk or on your hard drive. This is all rendered on a simulator in on a server. So I'm guessing, right? I might be wrong, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing that there is a limit to what they can actually do to make the graphics look better on iRacing. And also, I guess people don't care enough. They're just like they're there to race people online. As long as the cars look good, it's acceptable. And I could kind of live with that. But you cannot get away with that on a video game. A video game has to look good. And you look at World of Outlaws, it's not a bad looking game. It's pretty polished for what it is. But let's be honest, it does look a lot like a NASCAR Heat type of game. Is that going to be acceptable for a future NASCAR game? A brand new Dirt to Daytona? I honestly don't think so. Now, I'm not one of these people that, goes ape shit over graphics, but I do expect to see something more innovative. So when you look at the art assets of iRacing, I could see them using the cars and trucks and all that and bringing that over to a console game, right? Or I should say a video game. But the other assets, what can iRacing actually use to help the development of a video game in 2023 or 2024 or whatever? That's not going to cut it. I don't think people are going to be happy looking at 2D textures. Cardboard cutout, flat 2D textures of people that just stand there kind of waving like this, flat trees. Um, the fence, if you look at it up close, it's terrible. Like it's acceptable, I guess, for iRacing, but on a video game, no. So they can't actually use all that. Now, the only other thing aside from the actual car models that I do think iRacing could use is maybe the track surface, right? Because the tracks are laser scanned and the layout of each track is already measured and it's already perfectly laid out. I'm wondering if they can use the track surface, right? And then just from scratch build all the other, surrounding stuff, like the stands, the crowds, the infield, um, everything else you see at every track, the fence, all that stuff, you would have to create from scratch because I don't think you can just port that over as an art asset in 20, where we are today. And we're talking about next gen consoles and hopefully PCs. You can't. You can't. I mean, because even on, like I said, uh, a high end PC, the graphics on iRacing just don't look good. Like the car models do look good. Outside of that, it falls apart fast. So this, how like they did with World of Outlaws. I think what they did was they used car models. I don't know what else. So I we have to expect a lot more. If you're gonna come out with a new Dirt to Daytona, yeah, the game has to look a lot better. As far as Monster Games has been making NASCAR games for a long time. They're more than competent. Um, I'm not worried about them and iRacing, and I do think they can deliver a solid game. However, I gotta bring up, certain concerns. And one concern is, as I just said, they've been doing, they were part of 704 for a while. They did this World of Outlaws game, um, and all of the things they worked on do look the same. Yes, they've made strides. The AI is really good on NASCAR Heat 4. It's not perfect. There are a lot of issues, but it's a very fun playable game. So I'm not worried about them, but I am kind of worried that I don't want to end up getting something that looks like it was meant to be NASCAR Heat 6, right? Because if you look at NASCAR Heat 5 or NASCAR Heat 4, you have a dirt series and then you got the other series for NASCAR. Technically, if you change the name to Dirt to Daytona, it's kind of technically already there. I don't want that. I want something fresh. I want something new. I want them to kind of be a little more innovative. Um, yeah, I don't want to see something that looks like NASCAR Heat 6 and it's just called Dirt to Daytona. And so that's what I'm hoping doesn't happen. I am a little concerned because everything they've worked on looks the same. And World of Outlaws, although it's a polished looking game, it's not bad. It's not a bad looking game. But when it does have that feel of a Heat game. Um, Not just the graphics, the user interface, all that other stuff, very similar. And I do think that also is one of the reasons that they were able to create that game in less than a year and a half. So not only did they get some help from iRacing, but I do think that they were, I'm not sure if they could use Heat assets because that's technically owned by Motorsport Games, but maybe there were certain things they could kind of reuse and just polish up a bit. So that's a concern to me. And I like I said, if you're gonna do a Dirt to Daytona, you gotta start from scratch and you gotta be a little more innovative. I want to see these guys push themselves. I do believe in them, and I'm just hoping that we don't have to wait forever because we've been around for a long time. We sat through Eutechnics, we sat through 704, and now this Motorsport Games is it's just things keep getting worse, and you know I just don't see the gaming community having a lot of patience. So if you're gonna do this, do it right. And yeah, those are my thoughts. I just thought it was a good time to talk about this. I think iRacing is just right now, all they can do is wait. Now, there is one last thing. This would be a huge gamble, okay? They could. I don't think this is happening. I'm just saying this is really, really thinking outside the box. And it's a big gamble. But they could, they could already start working on this Dirt to Daytona game because, in anticipation that at some point down the line, they can get the license. Because think about it, if they're looking around the landscape, there's nobody else out there that has shown interest in making a NASCAR game. It really kind of is between them and Motorsport Games. Motorsport Games is on its deathbed, even though they refuse to pull the plug. They still are on their deathbed. The chances of them having a miraculous recovery and just holding on to the license for long term is pretty slim. So it's basically a waiting game. So technically, okay, this is just wishful thinking, really. I don't think this is happening, but they could already start development, just anticipating that at some point it's gonna, sooner or later they'll get their hands on that license. And when they do, they will already be well under development of this game. So that would be exciting. I wish that they would do something like that, but the realistic part of me has to say that would be a huge gamble, because if you put all that work into it and for what some reason or another they don't end up getting a license anytime in the future, now you just invested a lot of resources, time, and money into development of a game that you don't end up getting that license. Then what happens? That's a huge, huge gamble. And I don't think they would gamble like that. So I just, that's just something that I wanted to throw out there. I mean, it's possible. There's nothing to stop them from doing it, right? Because the chances are likely that Motorsport Games is going to lose this license at some point. Even though Brian France is doing everything he can to, you know, keep that alive, because he is a major investor in Motorsport Games. And I can guarantee you he has a lot of pull with NASCAR still. Um, he's just not the face. NASCAR, there was a brief moment about a year around this time last year where rumors came out that they were looking to pull the license. And those rumors just went quiet, crickets, and we never heard another thing. So to me, that's really strange. And if anything, those rumors should have got louder and louder, because as time went on, the things just got worse and worse. And every time something new comes out about Motorsport Games, it's always bad. But you don't hear a peep from NASCAR. Now, I could go into a whole other thing about NASCAR being asleep at the wheel while their brand is just in flames. But I think I'm going to do a separate video on that at some point, because this is way too long. But if you stuck around this long, thank you. If you didn't, I mean, I can't blame you. But yeah, so that would be a very interesting scenario, that they would have the balls to just let's start developing it, because we're going to get this license. That's a big gamble. I would love to hear that, but they obviously wouldn't announce something like that. Another possibility is just fucking develop a Dirt to Daytona game, but if you don't end up getting the license, just release a fantasy stock car game. I've always been an advocate for fantasy stuff. The licensing of these NASCAR games is a massive, massive headache. And what's to stop someone from just saying, fuck it, I'll just do a fantasy stock car game. Fuck NASCAR, fuck all these sponsors and all the licensing bullshit. Let's just create a fake game, a fake, or a phony or a fantasy type game, complete fantasy. I'd fucking buy it in a heartbeat if it was done right. So that's another really, yeah, that would be a stretch. I don't think anyone's gonna do it, but that I wouldn't mind if they did. So anyhow, Yeah, those are my thoughts. Uh, Man, I just wish we could get some positive news. It's going to be a long time before we get a game, regardless of what happens. And I already told you guys that earlier this year. It sucks. But yeah, um, those are my thoughts on this. Let me know what you guys think. I look forward to your comments later.